Shalom, shalom, Israel. Welcome back to another edition of World History According to the Bible. My name is Brother SHAMAR, and to my left,
Yatazar Yah.
Yatazor. And tonight we're going to be going over the Great Depression, Jacob's opportunity. So specifically during that time period, I also touched on some of the things that came right before the Great Depression, some of the things that was happening to our people in the sense of oppression, in the sense of political gains, in the sense of financial gains, just things that were happening during that time in history. We're going to open up with Jeremiah chapter 29 and start at verse 4. We're going to read 4 through 6.
It's the book of Jeremiah, chapter 29, verse 4.
Uh-huh.
Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, unto all that are carried away captives, whom I have caused to be carried away from Jerusalem unto Babylon.
Uh-huh.
Build ye houses and dwell in them, and plant gardens and eat the fruit of them.
Uh-huh.
Take ye wives and beget sons and daughters.
Hold on. So he said, the Most High was saying, this is what he's telling us being carried away into Babylon. He said, build you houses and dwell in them. Plant gardens and eat the fruit of them. Take ye wives. So what is he saying? He's literally saying, actually, let's finish on, then I'm going to explain that.
Con. And take wives for your sons,
Uh-huh.
and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters, that ye may be increased there and not diminished.
The Most High was like, even when y'all go into captivity, don't just give up. Because it's easy for that to happen, right? We go through all these different things, and the scriptures say that, things are set up to where Esau is trying to wear down the saints, right? We get caught into this loop every day, at least 5 days a week. You're probably getting up early in the morning, you working 8 or 9 hours, you traveling an hour out of the day. Anywhere between 9 and 12 hours of your day is just consumed with just your 9 to 5, just working for Esau, right? Then that doesn't include the time that it takes to get home, the toll of that traffic, right? You got a couple of hours to yourself, which oftentimes we spend just recuperating from the day and dreading the next day. Then we have to start the cycle all over again. You shower, you shave, I ain't gonna say shave, but you brush your teeth, you get ready for the day, and you do it all over again. And it's easy to get caught in that cycle, and it's also easy to become hopeless in the face of captivity, because it's like, man, is this all our lives is gonna be? But the Most High is saying, don't get so caught up on that you start to diminish. He wants us to still build houses and dwell in them. He still wants us to plant gardens and eat the fruit. He still wants us to be married and give our sons and our daughters in marriages, because that's the next generation, right? We're still supposed to be having kids. We're still supposed to be advocating for them to get married, for them to start families, for them to build and dwell in their houses, for them to have their gardens. So that's some of the things that we're going to be exploring in tonight's lesson, is the opportunity that our people had during the Great Depression, during everything that was going on, where captivity was, I would say a little tighter around our neck, because you had the Jim Crow, you had you had active lynchings. Not to say that those things aren't happening, but they're not nearly as common and they're not nearly as public, right? You had, they faced just very high levels of scrutiny and persecution just for being Jakes. Whereas now we have a little bit more liberty, and now that's, we just have more liberty, even though now it's to a fault. But he said he wants us to do these things so that we're increased there, right? You see the same thing in history when our people were in Egypt. We walked in with Jacob and the 70 souls. But then when we left, it was a great multitude with Moses, right? The only way for that to be able to happen is for us to continue to have daughters and sons, give them in marriages one to another, to keep building up our houses. And look what our people were going through. Our enemies were saying, let us come and make them serve with rigor, making us make bricks without even, straw. And the quota didn't change. But we still had to, in the face of all that captivity, in the face of all that tribulation, continue to remember that our nation must go on. Without us having kids and continuing on, the Most High giving us that increase, there isn't going to be an Israel. But we still have to do our part in maintaining ourselves in this captivity. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, is during the Great Depression, when America was at an all-time low, and shortly before and shortly after, what were our people doing? What opportunities did they seek? Did they find? Did they use so that we wouldn't be diminished? And can you take us over this to the PowerPoint? It's over at the PowerPoint because you know the
Yeah, it's up.
kind of the water. So the Great Depression, Jacob's opportunity. Says before the decline. So a lot of people are familiar with the Tulsa, Oklahoma Black Wall Street, but there were actually multiple Black Wall Streets, right? One of which was in Durham, which was called one of the first Black Wall Streets. It says in the early decades of the 1900s, Durham acquired a national reputation for entrepreneurship. Businesses owned by African Americans lined Paris Street. Among them were NC Mutual Life Insurance Co., led by John Merrick, Dr. Aaron Moore, and C.C. Spalding, and Mechanics and Farmers Bank, led by R.B. Fitzgerald and W.G. Pearson.
Nationally recognized, the business direct acquired the nickname Black Wall Street.
So this was one of the first ones, right? One of the first Black Wall Streets. Go ahead.
The 4-block area complemented the Haiti community just to the south, the principal residential district for Black Durham residents and center of the city's educational, cultural, and religious life. In the period when race relations elsewhere in North Carolina were at an all-time low, Durham's Black businessmen made strides.
So where everything else was starting to be on a decline, you see that our people found the ingenuity and the entrepreneurship was at an all-time high. It's no different than if you're in LA, what is it called? Is it Hyde Park? Hyde Park, yeah, there's a bunch of Black businesses, right? If you go down there just on any given day, you'll see a bunch of Black businesses. Now, of course, Leimert Park, Leimert Park. A lot of our people are into the Pan-Africanism, so you do see the African, jargon kind of being displayed. You see the drums and those kinds of things. But you see our people over there thriving. All the businesses that they open, the restaurants that they open, the healthy living, the entrepreneurship, bringing something new to the hood, so to speak. Bringing something new that's unfamiliar to these parts. Excuse me. Bringing something new to these parts. And, still having that ingenuity, right? Go ahead.
John Merrick, Dr. Aaron Moore, and C.C. Spalding, the triumvirate at the head of North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company, the nation's largest Black-owned insurance company, moved their headquarters in 1906 to Parrish to be joined by Mechanics and Farmers Bank, founded by R.B. Fitzgerald and W.G. Pearson in 1907. Urban renewal in the 1960s had a destructive effect on Durham's Black business community, especially Haiti. But by that time, the heyday of Paris Street had passed.
So it lasted for a good amount of time, right? And it said it wasn't really until the 1960s where that really destructive effect started to take a toll, and by then the heyday was already gone. But you see, for those couple of blocks, there were a whole bunch of Black businesses that were founded, that were created. Some even moved to the region just to be able to benefit because it was just a big boom that was happening. And this was around 1906, 1907. That was about 14, 15 years before the race riot of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Continued on with Jackson Ward.
Before it became a hub of Black business, residents of Jackson Ward often used white-owned businesses and faced discriminatory practices. Second Street became the hub of business activity for Jackson Ward, with many other businesses developed during the period. By the 1900s, several fraternal organizations had already developed the insurance industry in the Jackson Ward, but independent companies such as the Southern Aid and Insurance Company also operated in Jackson Ward. Insurance companies, banks, theaters, and many other types of businesses were located on 2nd Street in Jackson Ward.
Hold on right there. So look, you see insurance companies, right? That varies to all different kinds of things. And that's not only big business, it's very lucrative. So the business is obviously benefiting from it because people need insurance policies to ensure the protection of their property. But then also, obviously, insurance companies are for payouts, right? So if something gets destroyed, which obviously through persecution, discrimination was relatively common practice, there was some level of insurance within the neighborhood to ensure that things could be rebuilt. We had our own banks, right? That's a lot of money. Banks trade your money to be able to make more money. So imagine how much money is coming in and out of community, the Black dollar being recycled time and time and time again, whether it's through what do you call that? Necessities like insurance or commodities like going to the theater. People want to enjoy themselves. They want to relax. They have a good time. It's Friday, you get off of work, or Saturday night, you go into the theater having a good time, all within our own communities, and that money was just being recycled over and over. And it says there were many other types of businesses. Some operated within the confines of Second Street, but some were independent companies that had just moved over there, and it caused this blossom of business and entrepreneurship within the area.
A street in Jackson Ward, creating a hub of black businesses found in very few communities in the early 1900s.
And it was one of a kind. It was very, there weren't really a whole lot of other black hubs of businesses that were happening during this time period. It was very difficult to get that started, right? Keep in mind, Emancipation Proclamation was, I think, 1865. So they're probably 35 or 40 years from slavery. People couldn't even read and write. The whippings, the lynchings, everything that you were subject to as a slave, they were just off of that. There were more than likely still slaves that were living during this time, seeing this revolution take place, right? Not very far off from slavery, but look at how much our people were thriving, right? Go ahead.
Second Street became known as Black Wall Street by 1903. One of the earliest references of a street being called Black Wall Street.
And this was one of the earliest ones known as Black Wall Street. Then you have the infamous Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm going to go over, I thought this was pretty cool. So this is like what would you call this? Like an animated rendition of how Black Wall Street looked. And it allows you to kind of, you see it kind of comes to life. Now this is once it was destroyed. That's why they have the picture up first. This is after the race massacre in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. If you've never heard of this Black Wall Street, this is a good time to not only get some info, but to learn about it, right? So it says, the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921 killed hundreds of residents, burned more than 1,250 homes, and erased years of black success. So one thing, even when you look at our people today, you're really looking at us after being set back so many times, after being destroyed so many times, enslaved, persecuted, beaten, and just destroyed so many times. There was the Second Street and what was it? Durham, kind. Then you had this one in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and if I'm not mistaken, there was one more that was referenced, but it wasn't as big. But this one is exploring Tulsa, right? So not only were there hundreds of people killed, but 1,250 homes. So you can assume at least 1,200 families were displaced, lost their homes, had to figure it all out from scratch. They might have had insurance policies, but that many insurance policies to claim at once would be overwhelming for any insurance company, especially at a time like this where there wasn't even much circulation of money in the first place. There wasn't that much money even printed, let alone to be given out simultaneously from one company. And if they were insured by a white company, they could have faced discrimination. Excuse me. Let's take a stroll down Black Wall Street. What's the Tulsa Race Massacre destroyed? It says, imagine a community of great possibilities and prosperity built by black people for black people. Places to work, places to live, places to learn and shop and play, places to worship. So all these things, right? Because the Most High said, don't diminish while you're in captivity, find a way to flourish. Now the thing is, because we weren't serving the Most High, all these things ended up coming to naught, right? But our people were still able to find some level of success because like the scriptures say, Jacob is the former of all things. All the things that we face, it's literally like we even we laugh at it, but we have to acknowledge no other race could go through the things that we go through and still recover. You remember a couple years ago, what was it, on Wall Street now in New York, you had these stockbrokers that were losing millions. And they were so devastated by the losses they were taking that a lot of them started jumping out of windows, killing themselves. Mind you, they might have been millionaires that lost millions and still had millions. And some of them might have went totally broke, but they still had a profession that had made them millions in the process. You can still rebuild because you still have the skills and experience. And there are very few people in the world, let alone in America, that have actually worked on Wall Street, right? That sounds like you can recover. But they were so devastated by the losses they were taking, they were just ready to end it all. And many of them did. The slavery that we endured in Egypt, the slavery we endure now. I can't remember what interview it was where he said, and this was something recent. I think it was after the death of George Floyd. There was a press conference. It's a very famous press conference. I'm sure you could look it up. Where someone was asking, raise your hand or stand up if you want to be treated like black people in this country. You know what I'm talking about? And no one stood up. And he said, well, then you have to acknowledge, all of you are aware that there's an issue and some level of discrimination, but you're choosing not to do anything about it. We can acknowledge those things, but yet we still find ways to celebrate, right? Even though we only get American holidays, we'll still come together, celebrate each other, family reunions, having a good time and finding a way to smile through all the difficulties that we have. Lights get cut off. What they say, lights get cut off. White people, they panic. Black people, they planned it. Yeah. Because we know how to survive at hard times. You know that electricity bill coming up, you ain't got it. All right, time to go get some candles. We know how to survive through all of these things, and this is just really exemplified through these different time periods in history when our people were literally being killed in the street, and it was totally legal. Wasn't no police coming to save you. Wasn't no police even gonna pretend they was gonna come and save you. But yet we found ways to flourish. We found ways. It said places to learn. So we had schools, we had educational centers, community centers, and shop. That's your grocery store, that's your clothes store, that's your your mom and pop shop. That's your restaurants. And it said places to worship. We were building our own churches, right? No government involvement. It says, now imagine it being ravaged by flames. In May 1921, the Tulsa, Oklahoma neighborhood of Greenwood was a fully realized antidote to the racial oppression of the time. Built in the early part of the century in a northern pocket of the city, it was a thriving community of commerce and family life to its roughly 10,000 residents. So we already had all those things, right? Because look at how we can survive in times of tribulation and in times of trouble. So now imagine how much more we would be able to thrive when we find success.
Brick and wood frame houses and dotted the landscape along with blocks lined with grocery stores, hotels, nightclubs, billboard halls, theaters, doctor offices, and churches.
Hold on, look at all that, right? Grocery stores, hotels, people coming in and out of town. Think about how much revenue that generates, because that's literally just a temporary stay, right? Nightclubs, everybody want to have a good time. All the money that's flowing in there, the drinks that's being bought, the food that's being bought, the entertainment, people throwing money. You don't know how the club is, but that's a lot of recycling of that money. Billiard halls, theaters, even doctors' offices. Mind you, that we're employed with black doctors. How many cases do we see nowadays where there's discrimination in the medical field? Black women are statistically known to get less treatment, to be viewed as more dramatic. There's a brother right now who's fighting because his wife died. She complained of abdominal pain after giving birth to their child. She's saying, my stomach hurts. They feel like she's being dramatic. Sure enough, she had something that was wrong with her, and she ended up dying from it. It's a case that's still actively ongoing. I haven't seen anything in the news, right? You have those things, but imagine a society or a city, a place where that wasn't the case. Other black doctors, you going in and speaking with someone that understands you, that understands what you're going through, all those kinds of things. And churches, right? Go ahead.
Greenwood was so promising, so vibrant that it became home to what was known as America's Black Wall Street. But what took years to build was erased in less than 24 hours by racial violence, sending the dead into mass graves and forever altering family trees.
Man, and it came all crashing down, burning down by our enemies, right? Go ahead.
Hundreds of Greenwood residents were brutally killed, their homes and businesses wiped out. They were casualties of a furious and heavy armed white mob of looters and arsonists. One factor that drove the violence, resentment toward the black prosperity found in block after block of Greenwood.
Hating. That's all that really was. They saw that we were able to be successful. That's really Esau's biggest concern, and oftentimes their biggest fear is when we become self-sufficient. Because that was the same thing that Pharaoh was worried about. I'm not going to let the people go. Because he like, man, look what they can get done. Look at how much they're building. Look at how much success is coming to my hand just for having them in captivity. That's why every nation that's ever had us under, its authority has been so hesitant to let us go because of how much prosperity that comes to that nation. So when we found that, we could be prosperous without our enemies being involved, we tried to flourish. And like I said, it took years to build, but it took less than 24 hours to destroy, forever altering family trees. Imagine that. And I believe there are still 2 survivors that are advocating for reparations from this massacre. They're both close to 100, maybe a little over 100. But there are still two survivors that were there that day as children that are looking for reparations. Go ahead.
The financial toll of the massacre is evident in the 1.8 million in property loss claims, 27 million in today's dollars, detailed in a 2001 State Commission report. For 2 decades, the report has been one of the most comprehensive accounts to reveal the horrific details of the massacre, among the worst racial terror attacks in the nation's history, as well as the government's culpability.
Man, so look at this image, right? Look at everything that was once there, all destroyed, burned down. Hundreds of people were killed. It said altered their family trees. All those things, right? Less than 24 hours. Go ahead.
The destruction of property is only one piece of the financial devastation that the massacre wrought. Much bigger is a sobering kind of inheritance, the incalculable and enduring loss of what could have been, and the generational wealth that might have shaped and secured the fortunes of black children and grandchildren. What if we had been allowed to maintain our family businesses? Asked Brenda Nails Alford, who is in her early 60s. The Greenwood Avenue shoe shop of her grandfather and his brother was destroyed. If they had been allowed to carry on that legacy, she said, there's no telling where we could have been now. Where could we be now?
Man, so let me get Isaiah 14 and 21 real quick. So literally, because of how much money was lost, how many businesses, because not only was it money lost in the sense of they can no longer open for business, but a business is something you can hand down. We say it all the time. You can't hand down a job. It don't matter how good of a job you have. You can't hand that down unless you own the company. You could be a manager. You over 10, 20, 100 people. You're in a great position. Your son turns 18. You can't just hand him that over. You can't die and put in your will that you want your son to work in the same position that it took you years or degrees to work in a company for. You can't pass that down. But all these businesses was something that they could have passed down. But it's frustrating because we always hear how, Edomites will say, well, I wasn't there or I'm not responsible. Man, but look at your forefathers. After having us in slavery, after the atrocities that we faced, once we were so-called free, right? We were so-called free, had paperwork and everything, and yet we were still persecuted and hunted. And that's why there has to be this judgment. Go ahead.
It's the book Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 21. Prepare slaughter for his children, for the iniquity of their fathers, that they do not rise nor possess the land, nor fill the face of the world with cities.
So that was the same thing they were trying to do to us, right? They were trying to destroy us before we could rise and claim the land and fill the world with the face of our cities. Imagine had Durham and Tulsa not been destroyed, what that would look like today. Because a lot of these corporations, you see these old corporations, it's something small, but it's something very powerful. It'll say at the bottom of the corporation, since 1888, since 1908, since way back, over 100 years of service. They got built during times like this, and they've been afloat and flourished for over 100 years from generation to generation. When you see Hershey, that's the last name, right? What's another one? Griffith. That was it's a construction, boy, they got so much money, it's ridiculous because their, forefathers set up a trust of money that basically they could never touch. The Griffith Observatory, that's free to go to. They don't even need to make money off of that. They built that and just let people go in and learn about science. Griffith Park, Griffith Construction Company. What's another one? Man, but just bottom line, that's the last name, right? Generational wealth, and it's a massive, massive amount of wealth that they've accumulated to where they own land masses, they own, observatories, parks, and construction companies that are still making money to this day. That family never has to touch a tool, a job, a skill, a trade in their life should they so choose. And even more so if they choose to, or, if they have passions, they can go pursue that as much as they would like to. They can go learn whatever instrument, learn whatever trade, learn whatever business, study however many years, because they have the generational wealth that's been passed down from generation to generation for 100+ years that's now flourishing. Now imagine how much different our financial situation would be if we had companies like that. If you had big companies, that worked construction where fathers could employ their sons, and so on and so on, and then they grow up, and then they're the fathers that are employing sons, and it's just all Israelites, all so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans. Think about where we would be, how much that would have done for our culture and our society, to be able to be in control of what we can teach and what we can't teach because we own our own schools, to be able to be in control of what we eat because we're ordering and buying our own produce. All these things that are happening, or, that we face as curses in the hood, would be less of a factor if we had to be able to, the level of control that they have because they have that generational wealth. But all of that was destroyed. It says the Marquee Block. Perhaps no other collection of businesses tells the story of Greenwood and black entrepreneurship better than the 100 block of Greenwood Avenue, rising near the southern tip of the neighborhood. This Marquee Block was the pulse of the black business community. More than 70 businesses, and it actually goes through, it kind of lets you take a tour on the street, which I thought was pretty cool. More than 70 businesses operated in mostly 1, 2, or 3-story red brick buildings clustered along the block. All but a couple were owned by black entrepreneurs, right? So boom, on the left side of the street, whoops, and bam. You had the confectionery. If I'm not mistaken, is that candy? Confectionery? Oh, hold on. Let me get my dictionary before I say something, if somebody catch me.
It looks like.
Hold on. Confectionery. Sweets. Okay, yeah. So that's like a candy shop. So you know how the kids in the neighborhood, oh, can I get a quarter? Let me go up to the malt shop. That's a place to chill, to hang, to meet friends, buy candy. You having a good time. And then and that's pretty, I think that's pretty convenient. The same building that's selling sweets is the dentist. They know they wrong for that, but that's pretty funny. So you had the sweets and the dentist in one building, right? Then on the right side, look at all this. In one building, you had Earl Real Estate Company, the Oklahoma Sun, the Exchange Insurance Association, Byers and Anderson Tailors, Little Rose Beauty Salon, the Mary Jones Parish School of Natural Education. There was three physicians, and another real estate company. That's all in this building on the right-hand side. You can go in there and get everything. You can go in there and see the doctor, come out and get your hair done, go on the other side, be like, man, the doctor told me some bad news. Let me make sure I get some insurance real quick. Go get you a newspaper, and then go see about some real estate. All in one building. Look how many businesses that is, right? Go down a little further. Then you have the Economy Drug Code, the rooming house, the barber, and the electrician, all in one building. That's in 3 buildings, right? Let's keep going. It says the Palace Barber Shop, Safety First Loan Company, Carl Whitaker Rooms for Rent, Right behind that, you had a shoe shiner and a restaurant, right? It says in this stretch alone, there were 4 hotels, 2 newspapers, 8 doctors, 7 barbers, 9 restaurants, and a half dozen professional offices of real estate agents, dentists, and lawyers. A cabaret and a cigar shop were on the block too. Look at all that. All these things you talking about on one block. Now these weren't the only companies, but this was a flourishing street and one of the highlights, right? Then on the left again, right? You had the parlor, 2 cafes, a cabaret, a lawyer, and a hotel. A little further down, you had the restaurant, another barber shop, furnished rooms, and a public notary. Then on the left street, you had another confectionery, more candy, right? The Cleaners and the Home Undertaking Co. Then you had the Neely and Vanden Billiards, another restaurant. Here go another one, cigar store, photographer, insurance, attorneys, and oil deals. Then you had the theater, the barber, and the shoe shiner, all in one place. You get fresh and go to the movies in the same spot. Another barber shop, shoe shop, donut shop, a dress parlor, rooms for rent, and a printer. It says you could shop for groceries, play pool, take in a theater show, eat dinner, or get your hair styled without ever leaving the block. So imagine if we had that kind of stuff now, how much our people would just recycle the dollar. Now, we might go work for white businesses. We might go take money from them. But then we go home and everything that we need is on one block. You know how a lot of times you be grocery shopping after a long day at work, and you know one of them stores got something cheaper that you low-key need, but you like, man, I'm already here. I might as well pay the extra $2, $3. Imagine this right next door. You go get your sweets, go get your hair cut, go get your shoe shine, go to the dentist, go to the doctor, go handle your business, go see your insurance policy. You all that on one block. Then you get all done with that, you might go get you a donut and go play some pool. In one block. Another grocery store, dentist, 3 more physicians and another lawyer in this building over here on the left. Oops, another grocery store, more rooms for rent. Pullman Cafe, little cafe right there. So you had a billiard hall, the plumbing shop, and the Tulsa Star. You had a theater, a hotel, and a physician right here. Another cafe. Then you had the drugstore, the cafe, the tailor, the hotel, the barbershop, and the physician, all in one building over here on the left. What else we got? Another hotel, drugstore, and a Waffle House. Oh, it was cracking in there. Look how, man, people was going in there. Get your groceries and then sit down and get something to eat in the same spot.
My grandfather often talked about how you can enjoy a full life in Greenwood, that everything you needed or wanted it was in Greenwood. You never had to go anywhere, says Star Williams, 40, the granddaughter of oldest Granville Clark, who was 18 during the massacre. He talked about seeing black success and how his sense of identity and pride came from Greenwood. The businesses on Greenwood Avenue were owned by people who were among Tulsa's most prominent black citizens.
That's another thing. It said his sense of pride. So he had a sense of belonging and pride. Because a lot of times, right, we see the state of our people, and it be, especially before the truth, I would say before the truth, it was hard to take pride in who we were. Because we see the foolishness. You see the people acting a fool. You've probably been in situations where a whole bunch of jakes was gathered. You got to keep your eye on the group. Shootouts occur. Just all different kinds of things that we see coming from our people. But they were able to see success and peace. So just think about even the psychological toll that it must have taken to have seen all that peace, prosperity, and wealth thriving amongst your community, only for that to be snatched away violently. Then for the people who may have survived, like, man, it feels like it's almost no point of even trying to rebuild. Because will they come and do it again? If it gets too successful, you're probably going to be afraid, like, uh-oh, we made like $3,000 this month. Oh, man, that's a lot of money. That might catch somebody on the radar. Are they going to come and kill us and burn down the buildings again? Think about the psychological toll that must have taken for the rest of their lives. Then this is his granddaughter he's talking to. So he's just regaling her of the days that he remembers when he was younger. And she was 18 at the time of the massacre. Just imagine how much entrepreneurship that probably killed because people were just so afraid that it could happen again. It says Lola and John Williams came to embody the entrepreneurial spirit of Greenwood. They owned a confectionery at 102 Greenwood Avenue in the East End garage around the corner. So they had suites and they had a garage. You're talking about people who had multiple professions, multiple businesses. The Dreamland Theater. Oh, this is the same couple. The couple also owned the 750-seat Williams Dreamland Theater at 129 Greenwood Avenue, the first movie house for black people in the city. It offered both silent films and live shows and was also a community gathering spot. So you took away the sense of community, the sense of brotherhood and camaraderie when all these businesses were destroyed. You're talking about 750 seats. That's like everybody, well, I ain't gonna say everybody in the community because it was 10,000 people, but chances are on any given night that place was packed because they didn't have TVs like that. They might have had electricity at this time, but they didn't really have the same things that we have where everything's at home. Everybody going to chill. I'll see you at the theater. All right. Oh, it's a silent film coming out and it's some live shows, jazz and bands. And you had what was called the Roaring 20s that were just getting started at that time, right? You had all the entrepreneurship. You had all the what do you call that? You had the the renaissance of culture basically that was taking place. All the black poets, black writers, black screenplay writers, black actors, instead of trying to go and get a spot in a minstrel show, which was like when people would they'd just, be dressed up, acting a fool. You could come to your own community, put on a play in front of your own people, and you can actually have a role that you can take pride in. That's what a whole lot of our people do when they go to Hollywood. They get roles of what? You can play thug number one. You can be baby mama number one. You can be pimp number one. You can be hood nigga number 4. Like, that's the only roles that's available to our people, right? That's commonly what you see. You're not really seeing, you see a couple of black dramas. You see a couple, and then, it's always about problems. It's always about trauma, always about the black struggle. You don't really see a whole lot of black movies that's about success. You don't see a whole lot of Latino movies about success, right? You don't see a whole lot of success and love that's being bred. You see the same thing. What's that one dude? His name Hector. He played Hector in like 19 movies. And all of them, he was just Hector. And all of them, he was the same Hector. Like in all of them, he was like a street dude. And that's just the roles that are available to our people. But this was our opportunity to be like, nah, we're not going to do that no more. We'll do it ourselves. Let's see. Dr. R.T. Bridgewater was a physician with a practice in the Woods building. He owned 17 rental houses. Man, rental property is very lucrative. He had 17 rental houses and was also a community leader. So you're not only talking about people that had money, because we have a lot of people in our communities and in our nation that have money, right? How much money you think? What's Cardi B's net worth? You had to guess. Yeah, we gonna Google it. Mm-hmm. What would you say Cardi B's net worth is? And she may not even, and I know she's not even the most successful. What do you call that artist?
Like 40 million.
You say 40 million? Yeah, 40 million. So you got, a whole bunch of people. Cardi B, 40 million. Sure, Offset got tens of millions. The other Migos, Beyonce and Jay-Z pushing $1 billion. Michael Jordan pushing $1 billion. You have all these people that have money in our communities, but how many of them are actual leaders? How many of them are someone that you can look to and say, okay, that's how we should be. That's who has the vision and the power to be able to orchestrate things. You don't see those things anymore. But this brother was a community leader on top of having the money. So if he's seen something that could benefit the community, he had the money in the pool to be able to make things happen. The Tulsa Star, a black-owned newspaper. Yeah, a newspaper, right? So we see stuff on Fox, CNN. I always talk about that on current events. Stick to the script, right? The 4th Thursday of every month. I always read articles. And I always, it's hard not to catch the narrative or the certain diction that's used when you have a narrative that's being pushed innately, right? For example, you might see something like an 18-year-old that was killed, a so-called Negro 18-year-old that was killed by police, and they'll say an 18 or an adult. And then you'll have something like Kyle Rittenhouse, who crossed state lines with an AR and killed a couple people, and he's called a teenager. Small things like that, because when you hear adult, adult can be anything, right? You could be 21, you could be 45, you're an adult. You hear teenager, you think of somebody who's young, right? Somebody who probably isn't fully cognitively developed, probably not making the best decisions. It'd be little stuff like that that can really sway public opinion, but because we don't have our own newspapers, we don't have our own news sources, we can't control the narratives that are put out, right? But this was a newspaper that was for us and by us that was able to control that narrative. Man got lynched by a white mob, people would know about it the exact way that it happened. Somebody got cheated out of some business, put their paper in their name in the paper. You know what I'm saying? You can expose, you can do all kind of stuff because it was by us and for us. It said called his home on the affluent North Detroit Street palatial. Several women set up shop as entrepreneurs in the same building. Mary E. Jones Parrish left was a teacher and journalist who operated a typing school. So she's teaching fundamental skills. A lot of times, a lot of women were clerks, right? They learn how to type. She's setting up a typing school. You can come in as like a community center and learn how to type so that you can go get a job or start your own business. You can work for the paper. You can fast track because they're right up the street or in the same building. Learn how to type. You excelling in the class? All right, we're going to go over here to so-and-so's office. Oh, come on in. Yeah, here's one of my students. She's excelling in typing. I think you should give her a job ASAP. Okay, no problem. So you can start Monday. That's simple because it's Jakes that's running it, Jakes that own it, Jakes that's operating it. I mean, man, it must have been beautiful to see for the time that it lasted. It says, and Mabel B. Little ran the Little Rose Beauty Salon. Susie Bell ran an upscale restaurant called Bell and Little Cafe with her brother, Presley Little, Miss Little's husband. It offered 6-course meals that were written about in the Tulsa Star. Man, you talk about fine eating. 6 courses. We sit down with one big plate and be good. Imagine you get an appetizer, another appetizer, probably another appetizer. I don't know what you would do with 6 courses to me. I ain't never had a 6-course meal. I ain't never had a 6-course. I don't know what's supposed to be going on in there. But the whole fact of the matter is you getting some good eating, right? Pacing out your meal, having good conversation, you enjoying yourself, all being served, being cooked up around your own people. Buck Colbert Franklin, a lawyer, had an office inside a building owned by O.W. Gurley, one of Greenwood's founders. After the massacre, Mr. Franklin provided legal services from a tent. So, man, he ended up surviving and still being a lawyer, but then he had to do it from a tent. James Nails, shown here, and his brother Henry ran a shoe shop in the Gist building at 121 Greenwood Avenue. The shop carried Black Swan Records, and the family also owned a dance pavilion and skating rink in the community. So look at just like all the ideas in entrepreneurship. They control the music, so they're like, well, what else could we do with this music? We got the records. We getting the records fresh. Well, if the music ain't making money, let's go play it in the skating ring. Let everybody coming in, hey, that's hot. What is that? Oh, yeah, that's the record so-and-so. You can get it here at the shop. Man, like every shop and every building was just built upon success, and it was self-sustaining. And a dance pavilion. You go and dance. You're like, man, that was my jam. What's that? Oh, you can go ahead and get it at the record shop. You take it home. You dancing with your woman in the living room. Man. A.J. Smitherman, a journalist and civil rights activist, founded the Tulsa Star, which was headquartered at 126 Greenwood Avenue. The paper reported on stories of racial violence and advocated for the rights of African Americans. So imagine that, right? A lot of times we have problems getting the word out. And then sometimes that even gets abused because we can communicate so easily. You get a lot of BS. Y'all get them chain text messages. Be aware this weekend it's supposed to be 100 people. So I don't know if they legit, but what? To be honest, I wouldn't know if they're legit. They say it's supposed to be this many people dying or groups of white folks hunting people, and you don't really know whether or not it happened because when you watch the news Monday morning, they talking about puppies.
Yeah, con.
They're going to talk about sports, and they're going to talk about all these things as entertainment. Then probably during the hours that we're all at work, that's when they talk about, and also there were 17 black people killed this weekend. And on other news, let's go to the weather. Like, you don't know what's happening. But imagine if we own a newspaper, they're able to get the word out. You need to radicalize the community, you're able to get the word out. You want to talk about something that's happening, civil rights activism, come join us now, get the word out. One of the only papers that's in the community, and they can print what they see fit. J.B. Stratford, shown with his wife, opened the posh 54-room Stafford Hotel. It was considered among the nation's best hotels for African Americans at the time. So you're not just talking about black businesses that was coming up and that was like, hey, this is what we got. That was one of the best that was out there, right there on Greenwood Ave. Said a city within a city.
Mr. Stratford and Mr. Gurley, who purchased large tracts of land in the early 1900s, were among the founders of Greenwood. They began building on the northern side of Tulsa beyond the railroad tracks, forming the bones of the city, predominantly black neighborhood that was separate from white side of town. Greenwood was one of the few places in the country offering black citizens less than 6 decades out of enslavement a 3-dimensional life. By 1921, Greenwood had grown into a 35-block neighborhood with a bustling retail scene, as well as 2 schools, 2 newspapers, and a hospital. Here's some of the community key places are shown right here.
35 blocks. Look at that. How big that is. Sheesh. Look at that.
Wow.
From there, all of this, and those are some of the key places, but those weren't the only places. All those businesses, the rooms to rent, the lawyers, the doctors, the newspapers, all those things right there in the community. So even though now Edomites probably separated themselves, talking about they don't want to live next to us, we didn't have need to go into their neighborhoods.
Con.
And they like, damn, we losing money. Man, our hotel ain't selling. Man, we had vacant rooms for 6 months in a row. We about to close down. What can we do? They come to our neighborhood and they see it's bustling. Everything's going nice. Shipments we probably need extra shipments. White folks can't get the supplies that they need because everything going into the black community because our communities are flourishing. Then came the hatred, then came the destruction. Booker T. Washington School, which opened in 1913 with 14 students, had moved into its 3-story brick building in 1920. It would serve as a hospital and a relief center after the massacre. Yeah. The Baptist Church was among some half-dozen churches that burned. It was the city's largest black church. They wasn't just burning businesses, they was burning churches. Man. A small juke joint.
In the evenings, residents had their choice of entertainment. Survivor accounts that were relayed to relatives recalled neighbors getting gussied up to gather in Greenwood, with Thursdays being big because of maids' night out. Black domestics, many of them lived and workers who cleaned the homes of white residents across town, were off that day. Many African Americans migrated to Tulsa after the Civil War, carrying dreams of new chapters and the kind of freedom found in owning businesses. Others made a living working as maids, waiters, chauffeurs, shoe shiners, and cooks for Tulsa's new oil class. In Greenwood, residents held more than 200 different types of jobs. About 40% of the community's residents were professionals or skilled craftspeople, like doctors, pharmacists, carpenters, and hairdressers, according to Times analysts of the 1920 census. While a vast majority of the neighborhood rented, many residents owned their homes.
Look at that. They already were successful enough to where they were owning their homes. And on top of that, when the homes got destroyed, think about, property is super important, especially in LA, right? I think the prices are going up everywhere, but California, especially LA County, has such an influx of people that apartments out here are ridiculous. A 1-bedroom might run you $1,500, $1,600, $1,800. Don't let it be in a nice community where they got these little sites now like Zillow. It'll tell you it'll give it a rating, and don't let it be in that green where it's like 5 minutes from the hospital, 5 minutes from the theater, 5 minutes from the stadium. You be like, then they probably charge you $2,000, $2,200 for a 1-bedroom, luxury apartments, what they call them. And they might not even be all that luxurious, but it's in a nice area and you need somewhere to stay. Sometimes you can go to the hood and still get charged $1,300, $1,500 for a 1-bedroom, and you need somewhere to go. But now look at the benefit of these people had already owned their homes. You fall on hard times, look at how many people had to move back home because of COVID. Fall on hard times, the family got a house. Might be packed in there, might be a little uncomfortable, but you got somewhere where you can survive, and a little bit of money that you do come by is able to go that much further because you don't have any overhead in your mortgage or in your rent. But that was all lost when all those homes got destroyed. And then there was the actual massacre. It's crazy because I've read before that there were bombs that were used, and because most of the buildings at that time were brick doesn't burn. That's why brick is commonly used in ovens. The fire won't spread on brick the same way it will on wood or a lot of other materials that are used in construction. So I believe that there were a lot of bombs. And I believe there was even reports of them dropping bombs from helicopters. Still a good amount of information, but I think we get the gist. If you want to continue to read on, of course, you can always do that. But I do want to talk about getting more closely to Great Depression. So it says, before the decline, the Harlem Renaissance.
The Harlem Renaissance was the development of the Harlem neighborhood in New York City as a black cultural mecca in the early 20th century and the subsequent social and artistic explosion that resulted lasting roughly from the 1910s through the mid-1930s. The period is considered a golden age in African American culture, manifesting in literature, music, stage performance, and art. Outside factors led to a population boom. From 1910 to 1920, African American populations migrated in large numbers from the south to the north, with prominent figures like W.E.B. Du Bois leading what became known as the Great Migration. Cotton Club. With their groundbreaking new music came a vibrant nightlife. The Savoy opened in 1927 and integrated ballroom with two bandstands that featured continuous jazz and dancing well past midnight.
So you had Durham Black Wall Street, Tulsa Black Wall Street, and you had the Harlem Renaissance, all within a period of about 1900 to the mid 1930s, right? All these different things, the bustling and booming entrepreneurship and culture that was developing at that time. So here are some of the factors that started to lead to the developments that were taking place during the Great Depression, and some of the opportunities that we, capitalized on because of the time. So rapid overdevelopment led to empty buildings and desperate landlords seeking to fill them. So there were a lot of segregated neighborhoods, right? A lot of times we couldn't go into other neighborhoods. We couldn't, buy in certain towns, things like that, right? But because there was so much overdevelopment, they thought that things were going to go so well for so long. They had built all these buildings, hotels, apartment buildings, things of that nature. Then when they had, this economic decline, a lot of the landlords, typically, which were white in this instance, were looking for people to hurry up and fill the vacancies because they had already invested so much money and they needed a return. That was one of the factors that led us to be able to be successful in opportunities that got seized that saw some of these buildings come up, right? They might have been looking for, let's just say, money was way different back then. Let's say it's like $100 a month. Then somebody ain't coming along. It's been 3-4 months. They're getting to a point where they're not going to be able to sustain. They're like, all right, we'll take $50, $75 a month, $50 a month. Then a Jake comes along. Well, I couldn't do 100. I can do 50. I might be able to do better once things get going, right? Said that the Great Depression of the 1930s worsened the already bleak economic situation of African Americans. They were the first to be laid off from their jobs, and they suffered from an unemployment rate 2 to 3 times that of whites. So because we were the last hire, first fired, that signified, that created such a need for us to develop our own buildings. Because the same way that Jakes are trying to employ themselves now, right? You see that even today, because the economic situation, not only is it declining, but these businesses are like pretty known for being racist, right? You can't be yourself at the job, not even just in the sense of being late. I'm not even talking about stereotypes. I'm talking about you can't have certain conversations. You don't want to come off a certain way. You don't want to give the wrong impression. You can't let people be too afraid of you because you get fired. Then you can't let them get too comfortable because then they be trying to touch your hair and all that kind of stuff. So when all of our people were getting laid off and there were, lynchings that were happening because black people were employed while white people were laid off, you had people looking for economic opportunities to be able to flourish and create businesses and funding within our own communities. That was one of the opportunities that was seized. It says some charitable organizations even excluded blacks from their soup kitchens. So while everybody's broke and people don't even have the money to be able to eat, you got charities that were handing out food, right? Soup kitchens. They wouldn't even want black people coming in there. So what does that mean? Well, we got to go build our own soup kitchen, right? We got to go build our own restaurants. We got to go find something and maintain our own things because we're not going to be welcome nowhere else. We got to figure it out. This intensified economic plight sparked major political developments among African Americans. Then, because there were so many things that were happening, you had the lynchings, the segregation, the violation of our basic human rights. You had a whole lot of people that were calling for action politically, economically, different political parties that came up at that time, which we're going to talk about a couple of them. Lynchings, which had declined to 8 in 1932, surged to 28 in 1933. That's 2 people a month, at least. 2 people a month that were getting lynched in 1933. In some northern cities, whites called for African Americans to be fired from any jobs as long as there were whites out of work. It didn't matter what you was doing. Your life's passion was to be a painter. You painted murals on the side of buildings. They don't want you doing that because the white folks ain't doing it. You just got a simple job, just maintaining. You get home tired, back hurting, taking out, you the garbage man for the city. They want you fired just because it's white folks that's out of work. You're like, man. Some more of the factors.
The reason for greater black suffering during the Great Depression are linked to racial discrimination. For example, because African Americans were concentrated in those jobs and industries most sensitive to economic cycles and were the last hired and first fired, they became jobless in disproportionate numbers. Black protests took other forms during the 1930s. For example, blacks mounted successful campaigns to boycott white businesses that did not employ blacks. Such campaigns were conducted mainly in the ghettos of the cities as Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Cleveland, and especially Harlem, where blacks packeted before stores carrying signs with mottos, "Don't buy where you can't work." It was in Harlem in 1935 that intense feelings against white merchants and landlords helped produce another form of protest, the Black Ghetto Riot. This one was the first to have characteristics similar to the civil disorders of the 1960s.
Look at that. So our people were coming together. They're like, man, don't buy where you can't be hired. So you wonder why white folks started having to kind of look at our communities, because they're like, man, they may not like to see us, but our money is green like everybody else's, right? Then when you start having all these, they're firing us, but they still expect us to buy there, they was picketing in front of the businesses, letting all the other jakes know, don't go in here, don't buy it, don't spend your money around here. Because if we're not going to be hired, then why would we support?
Right.
And then here's one of the political parties that came about because of the labor shortage on our end, how our people were the last hired, the first fired, 2 to 3 times higher unemployment rates, wouldn't be allowed in soup kitchens. If they were given some type of government assistance, it was notorious that black people were given less. We were making 70% of a white salary. So you had political parties that were rising up in an effort to defend us and advocate for our rights. This one was called the National Negro Congress.
The labor rights were an important facet of the civil rights movement and figured promptly on the program of the National Negro Congress. Some unions excluded African Americans while others limited their rights in one way or another.
So imagine that, right? The union, if you work in a union today, that's supposed to be like your wall of defense against a big company, right? Because a union is a whole bunch of workers that come together. And basically, if it really came down to it where somebody's getting done wrong, you do one of us wrong, you do all of us wrong. So the union's supposed to come to your aid and say, hey, if this guy doesn't get treated right, I'll have everybody that's in this profession walk off the job tomorrow until he's treated right. That puts the pressure on. Then, not only does that company lose all the other, say if it's a carpenter, they lose all the other carpenters, cement masons, bricklayers, but then all the other companies are losing their work, right? Then they got to figure out what's the issue. Then they put pressure on the company that's doing somebody wrong. But at this time, the unions weren't even doing our people right. They was trying to limit our rights and discriminate against us.
The NNC convened for its first national convention in Chicago on February 14, 1936. The NNC grew out of discussion initiated by communist delegates to the Joint Committee on National Recovery's conference in May 1935 on the economic status of African Americans under the New Deal. John P. Davis and Communist Party leader James Ford stressed the need to consolidate the strength of desperate organizations dedicated to fighting racial discrimination.
So our people were coming together to try to fight all as a unit for the things that we could see that were being done wrong to us.
Despite lingering suspicion of communist involvement, the NNC delegates were able to agree on a broad program emphasizing the rights of African Americans to fair employment and housing, union membership and educational opportunities, an end to police brutality and lynching, and international and interracial solidarity against fascism. Over the next few years, local NNC chapters in Harlem, New York, Chicago, and elsewhere became locus points for broad-based community activism against racial discrimination.
So the Great Depression was between 1929 and 1939. So in the mid-1930s, during the Great Depression, that's when these organizations were being founded. We're advocating for our rights, advocating for just equal opportunities, you know, basic stuff that we still really have to fight for to this day. Housing, education, and employment, right?
The Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, established in the mid-1930s, organized large numbers of black workers into labor unions for the first time. By 1940, there were more than 200,000 African Americans in the CIO, many of them officers of union locals. The Communist Party, very active in attempting to address the problems and difficulties spawned by the Great Depression, continued its efforts to speak out against racial injustice and woo African Americans. He's had begun in the late 1920s when it emphasized self-determination for the Black Belt as an oppressed nation. As the New Deal government advanced labor and social welfare reforms in response to the working class upsurge, communists led in the formation of a new civil rights group, the National Negro Congress. The Congress sought to build alliances through the new industrial unions, organized under the CIO to influence the Work Progress Administration to advance the interests of African Americans in the fight for full political and social equality.
So because there was, you know, shortage of labor, shortage of resources, shortage of just finances, period, our people were finding opportunities to be able to say, you know what, we might be going back to jobs, but if we do, we going under these terms. We're going to form a union. We're going to have the NNC come in and represent us on behalf of the union and be a mediator between us and these companies so that our people aren't done wrong. We want to know fair wages. We want, you know, to be paid reasonable wages. We don't want to make less. We don't want to do this. We don't want to do that. And we had parties and organizations coming together to be able to advocate on our behalves. And if you have factories where, you know, say, you know, they need certain type of materials, or, you know, a lot of our people were working in plants, metal plants, you know, craftsmen. Man, we need to get this production back up and going if we're ever going to escape this economic decline. All right, well, you know, I got 5,000 guys that can start tomorrow, but these are our terms. These are, you know, this is what we got to be able to agree upon before any of these men can get started. That's a hell of an opportunity. Go ahead.
This took the form of campaigns for a national anti-lynching law, an end to legal segregation and disenfranchisement in the South, and for the elimination of racist policies and practices throughout society.
And they were targeting, you know, anti-lynching law to make it illegal to lynch, because it was literally legal, right? And, you know, a lot of times that's what Esau hides behind. Like the scriptures say, he frameth mischief by a law. If one of our people does any kind of wrong, man, you know, you see George Floyd, you know, the ABC 7, you see their Facebook page, everybody's comments. Well, I heard, you know, he was a drug addict, you know, and it's like, so what? Like, he deserves to die because he was on drugs. As if he was being, you know, any kind of problem. The man was very clearly in his right mind, very clearly talking to the officers, very clearly pleading for his life. He wasn't a threat to anybody. He like, man, I just want to go home. Some people say he used a fake $20 bill, allegedly. My whole thing is $20 is worth his life. So people, you know, Esau, they always try to hide behind what's politically correct or what's legal to be able to wage war, to be able to bring forth all types of injustices. So our people were meeting him where he was at. Well, we need a law saying that lynching is illegal and people can be prosecuted for both lynching, and there could be a punishment for not prosecuting a lynch mob.
Communists also played a leading role in the development of the Southern Negro Youth Congress, which fought grassroots battles to advance the struggles against segregation and racism. The non-white peoples of Washington State suffer higher rates of poverty and unemployment than whites during the Great Depression, but the 1930s also presented new opportunities for political action. Native Americans took advantage of the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 to strengthen tribal governments, while African Americans, Filipino Americans, and Japanese Americans explored new ways to fight for equal rights.
So all of our people, all the tribes, the so-called Native Americans, African Americans, the Filipinos, we were all trying to find different avenues and different opportunities for what political changes that were coming about during that time that could be potentially to our advantage.
New Deal programs helped somewhat. The Indian Reorganization Act allowed tribes to write constitutions, reclaim elements of self-rule, and take steps to preserve and honor their cultures. The tribes that shared the state's largest reservation formed the Confederate tribes of the Colville Reservation and stopped the proposed sale of reservation land. The Great Depression encouraged new expressions of activism. The NAACP, the Urban League, the Northwest Enterprise, published in Seattle by William H. Wilson, had long represented the state's black communities in the fight for rights and dignity. What was different about the 1930s was the black civil rights activists now found new allies, first in the Communist Party and later in the left-wing unions of the Congress of Industrial Organization and the left wing of the Democratic Party as represented by the Washington Commonwealth Federation.
I don't know. One thing I believe is somewhere in there, but even if it's not, I believe it was Franklin Roosevelt, if I'm not mistaken, that was the president at the time. I believe, right? And pretty much there were a whole lot of bills that were being passed. It was really just a big change in America, period, right? So you had changes that were happening in the military. The Communist Party was coming up. Tensions were escalating between other countries in America. And then everything was scarce. So while all these bills were being written, our people were advocating to be included within all of those things. Give us the right to be able to do this. Man, I really hope it's in there. I want to say it was Roosevelt that wrote a bill allowing black soldiers to be integrated into the military, to allow certain equal opportunity in employment. When some of these political parties threatened marches, he had to quickly sign bills or it would be, civil unrest on top of everything else that was already going on. So our people seized the opportunities in all this political change to be included, to be advocated for, and to be secured by some level of law to where we couldn't just be abused and hung, lynched, fired under any old kind of, for no reason, basically, to where we had something for ourselves. And then you had the Southern Negro Youth Congress.
The Southern Negro Youth Congress was formed in 1937 by young people who had attended the National Negro Congress in Chicago, Illinois in 1936 and wanted to implement its call for action. SNYC had the support of prominent black adult leaders, including Mary McLeod Bethune, Paul Robertson, Charlotte Hawkins Brown, A. Philip Randolph, and W.E.B. Du Bois. The first successful SNYC campaign helped black tobacco workers organize a union in Richmond. Next, it organized anti-lynching campaigns across the South. Over those years, the organization encouraged Southern blacks. The first successful SNYC campaign helped black tobacco workers organize a union in Richmond. Next, it organized anti-lynching campaigns across the South. Over those years, the organization encouraged Southern blacks to join the Congress of Industrial Organizations, helped register voters, and on one occasion, visited the White House to enlist Eleanor Roosevelt's support for their efforts.
That was the president, Eleanor Roosevelt. So that was And I think we're about to speak on it. Let's read this last one first.
The organization made extraordinary progress in making rural Southern black people aware of their rights and in teaching strategies for protest. Their activities also gained the attention of opponents ranging from Eugene Bull Connor, the chief of Birmingham's Department of Public Safety, to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Despite numerous acts of intimidation by both organizations, as well as groups such as the Ku Klux Klan, the NYC inspired a generation of African Americans, including Sally Bell Davis, the mother of Angela Davis, and Julian Bond Sr., to become the political activists. In doing so, the Southern Negro Youth Congress laid the groundwork for the civil rights movement of the 1950s.
So all those things were being accomplished, right? You had a lot of big political figures that were backing these movements. You had a lot of, economic advances that were made with our people organizing in unions. We also created powerful enemies, the FBI, the Ku Klux Klan, and but you see that a lot of this stuff was groundwork for the later civil rights movement, right? A lot of this was like the grassroots. The Southern Negro Youth Congress and the National Negro Congress were like the grassroots of what started getting the ball rolling to where 20, 30 years later, that's when our people really started advocating for those rights. And it was a lot more, public, right? It was a lot more publicized amongst the nation. Then you had the NAACP.
With the onset of the Great Depression of the 1930s, the NAACP confronted an internal dispute and external criticism over the merits of pursuing an agenda of civil and political equality versus an agenda of economic development and independence. Their merits were debated at the Amina Conference in 1933. In the political arena, the NAACP won the first successful campaign against a Supreme Court nominee, Judge John J. Parker, demonstrating the association's growth influence. By 1931, the NAACP undertook the defense of the Scottsboro boys, 9 black youth wrongfully accused of raping 2 white women, before losing control of the case to the communist-led International Labor Defense. But later, based on the findings of attorneys Nathan Margot and Charles H. Houston, the NAACP launched a legal campaign against de jure segregation that focused on inequalities in public schools. Toward the end of 1932, in response to employment discrimination, the NAACP sent Roy Wilkins, then the assistant NAACP secretary, and George Schuyler, a journalist and author, undercover to investigate conditions for the 30,000 black workers in the War Department's Mississippi River Flood Control Project.
So our people were taking on all kinds of things. From the way we were treated at jobs, the unions that were being formed, the right to vote, the right to protest, how we were being treated in schools, the education our people were receiving, defense attorneys on behalf of those that were being wrongly convicted. All these things, like holistically, our people were building. Our people were finding different ways to be able to fight against the system that had for so long oppressed us without any kind of representation. Now we were seeking the opportunity to be able to represent ourselves, to be able to get our own funding, start our own businesses, make sure that our voices were heard, and that political advancements were also made in our interests, right? And then there were even people that were going undercover. The NAACP Secretary, George Schuyler, right? He went undercover to investigate conditions of 30,000 workers that were working on the Mississippi River flood control. So, like undercover boss, that show that they have now, that's like, so entertaining. Our people were really doing that to make sure that people were being fairly traded. And there's nothing like being on the job with the people, that you're investigating. So they got to see, let's not get a company statement where they're going to make everything seem peachy. Let's go send somebody in there, work undercover, and really see how our people are being treated. Really see what type of conditions that we're under, the pay rates that we're given, the interactions between managers and laborers, the work hours, is everything what they say it is? And if not, what are we going to do to be able to advocate for the proper treatment of our people? So this offered just countless opportunities for us to try to rise up out of the mud. Only a few decades literally after slavery.
Among the association's top priorities was eradicating lynching. Throughout its 30-year campaign, the NAACP waged legislative battles, gathered and published crucial statistics, organized mass protests, and produced artistic material, all in the name of bringing an end to the violence.
And that was another thing. We saw an opportunity to be able to end the violence, right? Lynchings to be made illegal, hangings to be made illegal, assault against black people to be made illegal. Then not only, on those things, but in all these other areas. So you really see how many areas that our people were taking the opportunity to tackle political and social economic issues because there was so much reform that was coming about in the nation at that time, and there was no way around it. They needed Jakes. With all the workforce, with the lack of workforce, with the economic crash, with the lack of food, the lack of resources, they needed Jakes to be able to get things accomplished. Our work ethic, our ability to adapt, our ability to survive, but it was no longer going to be free. It was now going to come at a cost, and we had different organizations, different political parties, different advocates that were going in these companies, these schools, these businesses, these board meetings, even to American Congress, to assure that our people would now have a say. And one of the main things was outlawing that we could just be publicly killed the way that we were being killed. Go ahead.
After early worries about its constitutionality, the NAACP strongly supported the federal Dyer Bill, which would have published those who participated in or failed to prosecute lynch mobs.
And that was one of the laws that I spoke about earlier, right? So it wasn't just that lynching would be illegal, but also those who participated. There's this very infamous picture where it's a white crowd standing around a black man's body that's hanging, and people are pointing at his body. It's really like a show of force and terrorism, right? So that would be illegal. Not only would the lynching be illegal, but everybody that's in that picture, they could be visited and prosecuted. Sir, is this you in this picture? So you were there during the lynching? I need you to come with me. Come outside. That would have been illegal, right? And even though it's should be off top, that was a big move so that there would be less lynchings. It would be less easy to just kill us in the street and just continue on with everyday life. And for those that failed to prosecute lynch mobs, say there was a lynching in a city and they go talk to the police chief, what action was taken to prevent the lynch mob? None. Okay, how many arrests were made? None. Okay, well, what are you doing to prosecute those that were involved? We have a picture here. What have you done? Nothing? Okay, well, then now it's time for you to come with us. Now you're going to be tried for the crime of murder because you didn't even prosecute those that were involved in the lynching at that time. And the next slide, if you want to show it, is just most, if not all, the sources that were used. All right, Israel. Well, I hope this was informational and edifying. I hope it kind of gave light into, just how long our people have been fighting this fight, this plight to be able to be heard, to be seen, to be acknowledged, and to be properly treated. Ultimately, we understand out of the scriptures that these things aren't going to change. Can we get Joshua 1:8 to close this out? These things aren't going to truly change or truly end forever up until we really come back to the Most High. But you see that our people, we've always had that ability, right? We've always had the zeal, the know-how. We've always had the action. But the main thing that we were missing was the Most High. Go ahead.
It's the book of Joshua, chapter 1, verse 8. This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous.
He said, when you meditate in this law day and night, it's what you think about, it's what you're talking about. You're observing to do everything that is written right here in the scriptures. He said, then you can make your way prosperous. And not just prosperous for a time like all of these historical figures and times that are no longer that no longer exist, but that we would have longevity of prosperity. We would be able to foundate our own communities and, you know, have our own authority, our own government that Esau can no longer touch.
And then thou shalt have good success.
He said, and then we'll have prosperity, and then we'll have good success. So it's ultimately all up to the Most High, and it's ultimately up to us to keep the commandments and come back to our God so that we can see the success that our people, you know, and the opportunities that our people utilize. But we're looking for the kingdom that cannot be overthrown and for the government that will be established that will not fall. All praises to the Most High. So please continue to, you know, like and share the videos to help us spread the gospel. Continue to tune in with us. We appreciate your support. And with that, Israel, we say shalom.
Shalom.